You mentioned right at the top, Dan, your time with Feyenoord. I mean, we're not going to go into too much detail about it as we go along. Feel free to say as much or as little as you so choose. But I wanted to ask you sort of how it came about, and more generally, before we dive into some more detail, did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I loved every second of it. I have had 2 years there. Um, I It came about very simply. One of the heads of performances there, because there's two heads of performances. One has now joined Arne Ruben Pieters,
Yeah.
who I'm sure you know of. But actually, the other head of performance, Lee Eggers, who is an Australian national. Funnily, he had read one of my books many years ago when he played professionally in Australia himself. And Feyenoord are a wonderful club, a forward-thinking club, and I say forward-thinking because it's a club with really good people, who have striven over the last few years to bring it perhaps from a medical sports science analysis psych perspective up to speed, which they've done wonderfully well. And I've been a part of that puzzle, bringing me in as a consultant sports psychologist. And it's been a wonderful couple of years, and everybody's been very welcoming. And it was great to get the opportunity to work with Arne and his coaching staff. I landed at the time when the club was being successful anyway. So, for me, I always see myself as the 0.01% part of things. I'm in row Z. Sometimes, as a practitioner, you're called to come down into row A and do a little bit of work, and that's great. But you're always the kind of the whisperer in row Z, trying to deliver on some messages that filter through to players and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And last time we actually spoke about sort of the importance of sports psychology in football and sport as a wider matter, actually. But Arne Slot, and you touched upon it a couple of times already, he's been championed as someone who does look for those fine marginal gains when it comes to getting the advantages, no matter how small, really. I've seen stories about him sending players at final kickboxing to add to their aggression and stuff like that as well. That's been spoken about widely since he joined Liverpool, really. He clearly, you said it there, a forward-thinking operator, Feyenoord, a forward-thinking club. How much of that was driven by him then from your experience? I mean, was that a final thing or was that very much an Arne Slot thing?
It's both, really. Ultimately, football clubs are about people. It's about people and really drawing expertise out of each other. Of course, the head coach or manager, and I suppose in many respects, although I think in the Netherlands, he would be described as the head coach and not the manager. That's very a British thing, isn't it? More than anything else. He was the central piece, within the club. He was the main person, if you like, and so ultimately it is very challenging for any group of staff, head of medical and sports science, the heads of performances, the strength and conditioning coaches, the data analysts. It's very difficult for them to look for those margins, to do the basic stuff great, to develop world-class processes within a world-class culture. It's difficult for them to develop that if your head coach or manager isn't interested in those things. So, of course, my experience of Arne was that he's very smart, a great grasp of English, a wonderful tactician, a real student of the game, which obviously you have to be, but he really, really is. A very good people person, was very able to onboard and influence players and get some really, really good stuff out of them. I think it's cliche to say get the best out of them because who knows what the best is out of a player. But but the main thing that my experience of him was he was willing to use the people around him to get the best out of players. And I came into the mix and was introduced to him, and he was open-minded enough to utilize the things that I brought to the table to reinforce them. There's a certain language that I had suggested that he utilized, which he didn't have to. So again, that demonstrates somebody who's willing to flex, who's willing to listen, who's willing to put into practice ideas that others have come up with. My experience again was that he was certainly no pushover, and often I got checks and challenges and respectful pushbacks, which is absolutely as a head coach or manager should give until they're convinced that what you've got to say is appropriate and accurate and efficacious. So all in all, I really only have good things to say about him and his open-mindedness, and I'll be watching from afar and excited to see how he goes at Liverpool.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. It's really interesting how he taps into people such as yourself, but we've already mentioned a couple on the way, Ruben Peters, Fabian Otter. I mean, the open-minded is really what I expected you to say. I was almost going to bring it up myself at some point, because that's how it feels to me. It's almost as if, without putting too simple a term on it, like no idea is a bad idea a little bit. He's just willing to accept different opinions, different challenges, different thought processes in order to try and get the best out of absolutely everything he has at his disposal. And that, to me, is so, so interesting. I mean, just to sort of round off on Arne Slot, really, in your time at Feyenoord, I guess from a Liverpool point of view, would you say we're likely to see more sort of innovative methods and out of the box thinking and different ways of, again, getting that extra 0.0%, whatever it may be, out of people?
It's a really good question, and my best but disappointing answer is I have absolutely no idea. I really don't, because it depends so much on what he walks into and what is required. I think it's very easy in this day and age. This culture of marginal gains, I suppose, in many respects, started with Sir Clive Woodward over a decade ago, with the 1%ers. We don't do one thing 100% better. We do 100 things 1% better, which has had its critics, even from within the England camp at that time and there on after, and then obviously extended to Sir Dave Brailsford, which was the marginal gains, and there's been some criticisms of that as well. I really just think it depends on the context, and that context is quite complex, and so it's just what is required. And again, coming back to what I said before about my experience of Arno is he's not somebody who would just take on board anything, and I think that's really, really important. You can't just be this sort of cliched sponge where you just do anything. It's got to be done for a reason, and then it's got to be done properly. So my guess is that, and this is an absolute guess, is where he will start will be that word fundamentals. He'll put the right things in place to begin with, and then build from there. And I think along that journey, I'm sure there will be some things that he does that people might look at and go, oh, that feels a little bit different. I mean, I remember Jurgen Klopp utilizing neurofeedback machines, when Trent was wearing one. And I would be 100% honest, and I would say I'm not a huge fan of that, but I don't know 100% the company that was used and how it was utilized. I'm not too sure the science is good enough for it yet. But that's a demonstration that Jurgen was obviously in there doing those marginal gains, whether effectively or not. So I think modern day coaches, they just have to be in that place to be successful. Yet at the same time, they need a keen eye for BS, or they need a keen eye for something that they think, down the track, this might be effective, but right now, this is going to actually create noise rather than strip back noise.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, really interesting. It's fascinating to hear sort of how much he relies and he sort of leans on the people in and around him for that. And as you've already said, I think you said elsewhere, some of the people he had with him at Feyenoord about as forward thinking as they came, and that's just a really interesting thing to me.